Hey there! Welcome to my channel. Are you ready for some hilarious science facts that will blow your mind? Today, we're diving into the wacky world of burps and all their fizzy, gassy glory. You won't believe what happens when you hold one in. So get ready for some seriously silly science that will have you saying burp. Now, who doesn't love a good burp? It's the sound that never gets old, especially when it happens during an important moment like right before you walk into a job interview or during a silent movie scene. But while burps can be super embarrassing sometimes, they're actually really important for our bodies. You see, when we swallow, we don't just take in food, we also take in some air. This happens whether we realize it or not, and it's completely normal. However, all that extra air has to go somewhere, and when it reaches the bottom of our stomachs, it starts creating some serious pressure. Imagine you're at the bottom of a pool and someone takes a giant underwater paw. If they do it fast enough, it creates a suction that sucks you upwards. That's exactly what happens when we burp. The air that's been chilling in our stomachs gets suddenly sucked back up through our esophagus. But instead of bringing up water like in the pool example, it brings up air. This rush of air is what makes that classic burp sound, the rush of air as it leaves our mouths. But why does the air make that sound? Well, when the air leaves our mouths, it causes vibrations in the air around us. These vibrations are what we hear as the sound of a burp. And you know those times when you burp and the sound is just so incredibly loud? Well, that's because when we talk or laugh, we're actually pushing air out of our mouths. When we burp, the air has nowhere to escape, so it builds up pressure until it's released with a huge burst of sound. Now, burps aren't just a way for our bodies to release extra air, they're also a way for us to get rid of excess stomach acid. Our stomachs produce acid to help break down the food we eat. But sometimes our bodies produce a little too much acid. And that is when we start feeling those uncomfortable heartburn symptoms. A good burp can help neutralize this acid and bring us back to feeling great. But burps aren't all fun and games. Did you know that bad burps can actually be a sign of something more serious going on in your body? That's right. While most burps are harmless, persistent or foul-smelling burps could mean that there's a problem with your digestion. For example, if your stomach isn't breaking down food properly, you may end up swallowing more air than usual, leading to more burps. In fact, burping more than usual can be a symptom of a number of different conditions, such as gastroesophageal reflux disease, irritable bowel syndrome, or even an allergy to something you're eating. It is important to pay attention to your body and see a doctor if you notice any concerning symptoms, along with excessive burping. Who knows? It could be a sign of something serious that needs attention. So now that we know what causes burps and why our bodies need them, it's time to answer the age-old question, what happens if you hold in a burp? Well, let me tell you, holding in a burp is kind of like trying to hold in a fart. It might work for a minute, but eventually it'll come out with a vengeance. And that's because burps are actually a reflex, which means we can't consciously control them. When we try to hold in a burp, we're essentially trying to keep the sphincter muscle at the bottom of our esophagus closed. But eventually, the pressure from the air in our stomachs is too much for that muscle and it relaxes, letting the air escape. And when it does, it usually comes out with a lot more force than if we had let it out earlier. Not to mention that holding in burps can cause all sorts of discomfort like bloating, belching, and even stomach pain. But what about those times when we really need to keep quiet? Maybe we ray in the middle of a job interview or a first date and we feel a burp coming on. Well, luckily for us, there are a few things we can do to try and prevent burps in these situations. First, we can avoid drinking carbonated beverages like soda, which can make burping worse. Second, we can chew with our mouths closed so we swallow less air. And third, we can try not to talk while we ray eating since that can also cause us to swallow more air. Following these tips might not completely prevent burps, but they can definitely reduce the frequency and severity of those embarrassing moments. And let's be real, we've all had those moments when we desperately needed to keep it together and a burp almost ruined it all. But thanks to these tips, we can be a little more prepared next time and hopefully avoid those cringe-worthy situations. And here's a pro tip for you. If you absolutely have to let one rip, excuse yourself and head to the restroom. It is better to leave quietly than risk setting off the burp alarm in the middle of an important meeting. Now that we know how to deal with burps in public, let's take a closer look at what happens to burps once they leave our mouths. When we burp, the air we expel can travel through the air in front of us, but it can also travel backwards into our ears. This can happen when we burp loudly or when we're in a very quiet environment. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like everyone was staring at you as you let out a gigantic burp? Yeah, me too. It's always those times when it feels like your burp is echoing through the entire room. And that's exactly what's happening. The sound waves from your burp are bouncing off the walls and making it seem like the noise is lasting forever. But it's not just the sound that can travel backwards into our ears. Sometimes the air we burp out can actually make its way into our nasal passages as well. This can create a strange sensation in our noses as the air rushes through them. And you know those times when you feel like you have a burr in your nose, but you can't seem to get it out no matter what? Well, that is likely because of a burp that went rogue and decided to take up residence in your nasal passage. But burps don't just affect us humans. Our animal friends can burp too. In fact, burps are a common sign of a healthy digestive system in many animals, including cows, sheep, goats, and even camels. They're not only a way for animals to release excess gas, but they're also a way for us to communicate with each other. That's right. Some animals use burps as a form of communication. For example, in a study published in the Journal of Ethology, researchers found that domestic pigs use different types of burps to communicate with each other. Pigs that were about to be slaughtered produced longer and louder burps than those that were not. Scientists believe that these pigs were using their burps to warn others of potential danger. But not all animal burps are created equal. Have you ever heard of a goat fart? No, it's not just a funny term for goat burps. Goat farts are actually a unique and sometimes explosive bodily function that has nothing to do with burping. That's because goat farts are caused by a buildup of methane gas in their digestive systems. When goats digest their food, they produce methane gas as a byproduct. Normally, this gas would escape as burps or flatulence. However, in some goats, the gas can build up and become trapped in their digestive system. If you want to learn more about the human body, stay tuned for more hilarious science facts and experiments. And remember, it's okay to be a little weird sometimes. After all, we're all a bunch of walking, talking, burping, farting gas machines. Embrace it.